We're rolling.
All right, hey, Scott Schrader, and
Yeah, I'm CrashLit.
we're going to talk about recruiting here, and we're going to talk about last week's game. We're going to talk about a couple of other hot topics that we've had on the message board and social media. CrashLit has got that stuff all figured out, and what we're going to start off with is USC had another, just despite the opponent not being all that strong, USC had a really impressive visitor list for the Georgia Southern game. Um, Quite a few of them were commits. And in years past, it seemed like games like this, the visitor list was maybe three or four guys. The last two games have been like 20 guys that were top targets or commits. And it was kind of headlined by Kenai Pepe, Brett Collier, Vlad Diakonov, Esun Tafa, Talanoa Ely, Tom Tom Tapui, Samote Katoanya, Jake Johnson, and Andrew Williams. All those guys are committed. And um, an interesting story that involves these guys that visited this week is Brett Collier, Cannon Smith, and Mark Bowman. He was also there. I didn't list him. Um, those guys all grew up together in Colorado. They played youth football together. And what's interesting about this is that they ended up going on to different high schools. Breck is at IMG Academy, and Cannon's at Valor Christian, and obviously Mark Bowman is at Mater Dei. And the odds of those guys being from a different state and going to different high schools in different states and ending up at the same college is extraordinarily low, I would think, the chances anyway. And then he add in Kenai Pepe, who's been Brett Cologier's roommate since they were freshmen at IMG. Add that to the equation, and he's another commit. It's really interesting story, and we're going to have more on that in the coming weeks. But there were also some really impressive 2027 targets. Danny Lang showed up, Dante Wright from Long Beach Poly, Quentin Hale, one of my top wide receivers for the class of 2027 from Cathedral in Los Angeles. Eli Woodard. I don't know if Taven Epps, he's on my list. I'm not sure if he was there, but there are also a couple of 2028 targets. Jalen Flowers was a headliner there. So you got a few of those guys. Gavin Williams is USC's, he's one of the top safety targets. And Steve Wilfong hit him up after the game, and USC is thought to be the leader there. Danny Lang, USC and Ohio State. Quentin Hale, I think USC is the clear leader there. So there are a lot of guys that were on campus watching the Trojans play, and most of the feedback, since the opponents weren't that tough, was about kind of the vibe that they were seeing on the sideline and what it was like after the game in the locker room. And then we're going to also talk about a couple of the guys that kind of had top performances this week. I don't know if we're going to be doing this going forward because it's kind of hard to gather stats, but I think the one guy that I'm going to mention is Deshaun Rideau. Had 266 yards rushing last week, and I think he averaged 21 yards per carry. So that was definitely worth noting. Did we mention Braden Jones last week, Crash?
I don't think we did, but I think he's definitely a guy to keep an eye out on for sure, Scott, especially as we, are looking as, just everything's starting to come through. I think he's definitely a guy we want to be keeping an eye on for sure.
And he shut down his recruitment. I mean, even though we really didn't have much doubt about how these guys shut down their recruitment, it's always notable when they are telling other guys from that aren't covering USC, and they're objective reporters that I mean, not that we're not not objective, but we're probably viewed as less objective than others. But and so what we're going to do is we're also going to talk about Peyton Houston, class of 2027 quarterback target. And what did we learn about him, Crash?
He's down to five schools. It's USC, Clemson, Oklahoma, Texas A&M, and Texas. He's going to pick one of them on September 15th. And I think this can be a big pickup for USC if they can get him to sign. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see which way he goes with this. And hopefully it could be another big pickup for the quarterbacks and Lincoln Riley, especially if he can continue to, just get these solid young guys in here and then have them get time to grow and develop underneath the incumbent quarterback, which would be Hassan Longstreet once he assumes the starting role. And then that way Peyton would be able to learn from him as Longstreet starts and then get to grow and develop.
Yeah, we have submitted a prediction for Oklahoma. Steve Wiltfong and a few other guys from rivals have also submitted predictions for Oklahoma. God knows where these situations will end up. If he does end up committing to Oklahoma, as we believe he will, the USC will pursue. There'll be like 3 or 4 class of 2027 quarterbacks on their recruiting board, and USC's not going to be in a hurry to fill that spot. So they're going to take their time with it. So that kind of covers the recruiting stuff. There's not a whole lot going on right now. USC's got 32 commits. They're going to probably add 2 or 3 more guys. The one last note that I'll make is Keabe Brown, 4-star tight end from Corona Centennial, will be taking his official visit to USC next weekend when the Trojans face Michigan State, which leads me to the topic of Michigan State. 8 p.m. kickoff. What's up? What were fans saying, Crash?
I think there's just outrage across the entire country over this decision right now, Scott.
Yeah.
That has just been clear from just the moment the Big Ten, Michigan State, and the Trojans posted their graphics announcing the kickoff time. I mean, Michigan State's page even said it's going to be a late night, folks. I think that's almost verbatim what it said when I saw it on X yesterday. But even though there's outrage about it, and yes, obviously USC fans thought they'd be getting out of those late 7:30, 8 p.m. kickoffs that the Trojans regularly had when they were in the Pac-12. I didn't see that coming at all from the moment USC was announced it was joining the Big Ten, because that late window is clearly valuable to the networks, and Fox saw that. So that's why they won it. And pretty much the networks told the Big Ten when they added those 4 West Coast schools, you guys want to make $65 million a year each? This is the price. You're gonna have to play. You're still gonna be playing 8 p.m. games, and you carry a holdover Big Ten schools. You're gonna have to play them too, even if that means 11 p.m. local time for all the Spartans back in East Lansing. I think that's really what it comes to, and it's like, but it's just the reality of what it is. If these schools want to be making the money that they're making, this is the price, pretty much.
It's not like these other programs aren't playing 7:30, games also. It just seems a lot worse when you're on the West Coast and you're playing an East Coast team, because I've been on the East Coast and watched a few games over the last few years with my family, and it's just brutal, with a game ending at 3 a.m. But it's not like this is the norm. There's not going to be as many of these games. So I understand why fans were upset. I understand why media is upset, because they're not going to leave the Coliseum till 3 a.m. But it's not that big a deal, really. And I think you brought up a good point. It's certainly not going to be hot.
I think so, yeah. I mean, I know a lot of fans generally have not liked those later games, and I'm not saying like 7:38 is my favorite kickoff window. I personally prefer a 4:35 kickoff window, like what USC's had for their first 2 games.
Yeah.
But I'll take 7:30 or 8 over playing, at least right now, at like 3:30 or earlier.
Yeah.
Although it sounds like, at least for the Spartans, from what I was reading earlier, right before we hopped on here, Scott, I was reading John Wilner, the Bay Area News Group. He kind of broke down everything that's in the media rights contract with the Big Ten and its media partners, Fox, CBS, NBC. And at least what he was saying is, I think there is a thing where I think each of the Midwest Big Ten schools can only play like a late game once a season on the West Coast. So it's not like, oh, Michigan State's going to have to do this like every like two times a year. It's like, it's pretty much, you just might have to just get the short straw here once in a while as part of the pretty much the cost of being in this expanded coastal new world Big Ten.
Yeah. I mean, it is awkward the way the Big Ten is set up, But yeah, this is not going to be the norm. USC will probably have another night game for all we know, but ultimately, if they have a good season, nobody's going to care. And so let's move on. We talked about the game last week, and what were kind of the things that stood out to you about this Georgia Southern game?
So obviously, I've been really impressed with Jade Mayava over these first 2 games. I know people were saying we're kind of doubting his abilities, but I kind of figured once he'd have a full year, really just, knowing he was going to be the presumptive starter, even with the likes of Hassan Longstreet and Sam Heward coming in, I still thought he had a really good chance to really show it. And I saw his potential last year. It's just, he was just very inconsistent with it. We saw the flashes, it just wasn't as consistent as it's been. And yes, obviously Missouri State and Georgia Southern aren't as good at teams as USC is going to face once it gets into the thick of Big Ten. But
Mhm.
still, just what I've seen from him so far has really impressed me. In addition, this should be probably the first thing everyone thinks about: Makai Lemon and Jacoby Lane. Those guys are just insane to watch, and it's been so fun just watching them completely ball out on the field.
Yeah.
The, my
It's
other
it's also it's also been really fun to watch that running backs room. Yeah, it just seems like no matter even Harry Dalton, true freshman from Virginia, came in and had a couple of runs that people were talking a little bit about. But just talk about some of the runs that you were watching these guys make last week.
You're talking about just guys who are standing out. What about just King Miller, the walk-on, having some flashes of brilliance too? Like, I wouldn't be surprised if that guy gets put on scholarship next year for how he's been looking. I mean, obviously, I think
Definitely.
there's a lot of factors, but from what I've seen right now, if there's a guy who may deserve the next scholarship, it could be King Miller, I think. But the other thing that really stood out to me about the running back room was this year was Lincoln Riley's patience with it. We saw a bunch last year. He either see it wouldn't work, or I think what Quentin Joyner had a couple crucial. I'm not saying they weren't, they were obviously crucial fumbles, but and then something like that would happen. Riley would just be like, run game's over. Like, even
Yeah.
though Woody Marks would generally be having good games, but it was just like I really liked that he stayed patient with it and didn't give up on Wayman Jordan after he had that fumble early in the game against Georgia Southern last week. I thought that was crucial because one, then it gives him a chance to regain his confidence, and two, it just keeps your offensive scheme much more versatile because then you have the run game firing on all cylinders, and when the defense starts to scheme for Sanders and Jordan, you can just open it up and just throw it to Lane or to Lennon.
The offense obviously speaks for itself. They scored 70 plus and 59. But just the defense was a semi hot topic on our site at WeRSC after the game, and I think fans were kind of upset on the ability of Georgia Southern to gain big chunks of yards with the running game, and seemed like there were some breakdowns in the secondary, maybe in the linebacker with the linebackers as well, but just overall, just your impression of the defense through two games so far.
I think the defenses look pretty good for the most part. I do agree that there were a couple of plays that looked kind of broken or busted that probably should not have happened. And I think that does. I think right now it's like what we were talking about earlier. Like we talked about the example you gave earlier. Like Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois last year and still made it to the championship. They didn't lose another game until they faced Ohio State in the final. But it does, obviously, you're playing a lot of younger guys, second stringers, even third stringers. So I think I'm not saying you shouldn't be concerned about it, but I'm not like thinking, oh, this is going to be a consistent issue like what we saw a couple times last year, and especially during the first few years of Riley's time here with Alex
Yeah,
Grinch was the defensive coordinator. I think we can all agree, all of us as USC fans, all USC fans can agree that this defense is definitely much better, looks better, I think, than it did last year, and certainly than it did 2 years ago.
definitely. I mean, they're going to have to clean stuff up going forward. The opponents are going to gradually get tougher. At some point, you're going to have Michigan rolling in through the Coliseum, and their quarterback struggled against Oklahoma quite mightily. But true freshman, he's going to be much better 5 weeks from now, 4 or 5 weeks from now than he was against Oklahoma. Um, but it's just I look at it this way. Last year, USC had the lead in every football game they played in the fourth quarter, except against Notre Dame. I think the defense ended up being ranked something like 50th in the nation or something like that. It just, in my opinion, they've upgraded the personnel on that defense significantly this offseason, whether it's with moving some of the younger guys up that they've developed, the transfer portal or whatnot. So yeah, I would fully expect the defense this year to perform much stronger than it did even last year. Now, I don't know where they'll end up being ranked, but I also think at the same time that the offense is not going to struggle like it did last year. And I even think that we saw the offensive line, there's still some moving pieces going on there. We don't know what the permanent lineup is going to be with that yet. Riley said the other day, I think yesterday, in fact, that there's like seven guys that are kind of in the mix to be in the starting rotation. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes. But I think overall, I think the offensive line improved over week one. Um, any other items? Well, let's do this. Were there any players? I mean, we've talked about a few of them, but were there any defensive players that really stood out for you?
I think just a couple of the guys that we've kind of just been talking about. I think obviously like Kamari Ramsey, Eric Gentry, those guys always come to mind, especially like they've been leaders, they've been here for a long time. So those guys always just stand out to me, just more from a leadership perspective. But even just some of those other guys, like Anthony Luke or Anthony DeCarlos Nicholson, I think also stood out to me. Just a bunch of just those younger, just guys who've just kind of been here for a while and just know how Danton Lynn schemes, I think really have stood out
Yeah.
and just helped pass it on. And I think you're starting to see those guys really start to, I think, be leaders, and they'll need to step more, especially with some of these, like, especially to avoid more of these broken plays that allow big offensive, that allow the opposing offense to, have a big play.
All right. Any other topics we need to cover?
I think we should probably preview the upcoming game against Purdue because I think there are a few interesting storylines, especially when it comes to ties between the Trojans and the Boilermakers. The
All
first
right.
one that actually comes to mind might not be the one a lot of people are thinking of, maybe some. I know the one probably a lot of people think of is Josh Henson now being the offensive coordinator at Purdue. But the one I think of most is Jade Mayava versus Barry Odom. Odom coached Mayava 2 years ago at UNLV prior to Mayava entering the transfer portal.
Yeah.
And that one I'm kind of interested in just because Odom's a defensive coach, Mayava's a quarterback. How does Barry Odom use what he knows about Jade Mayava and how he calls plays against him from when the Trojans are on offense? But then I'm also interested to see how Josh Henson does now being the offensive coordinator. And I think he's coaching tight ends now at Purdue in addition to overseeing and calling the offensive plays.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah. I think, yeah, because I know he worked with the O line and was the offensive coordinator, but it sounded like he wanted to call plays from what I was understanding. And with Lincoln Riley still calling the offensive plays, I think it was a opportunity for Henson to kind of, get that next step to continue advancing his career. So I definitely, those have been some interesting storylines. Boilermakers have had are 2-0, but I think this is one that USC should be able to take care of business of and definitely need to. And I think if they can win this, they could have an opportunity to be ranked after this week if everything breaks right for them with the teams in front who've received more votes from them this past week.
Well, the running joke on our message board is, they'll win 65-14 and they'll drop a couple of spots in the rankings.
Well, I mean, we even saw the one controversy with the one AP voter. I think it was Haley Sawyer,
Oh
who
yeah.
inexplicably moved Florida up after they lost to South Florida. But then even still, I think, you know what? At the end of the day, if you win, you're going to move up eventually. People will notice it. Really, it doesn't. I mean, I'm not trying to sound like a hater, but in some ways, does it keep USC more motivated if they aren't ranked, especially in this early part of the season? Because then
My
it's
guess
like you're
is
kind of
yes.
playing, because then you're playing from an underdog, kind of playing more with that underdog mindset. And then as you rise up, people aren't exactly ready for you. I think we saw that most notably with Arizona State last year. I think we saw the Sun Devils just start the year unranked and then didn't really creep in until back half of the season, and then really shot up when they won the Big 12.
ASU was picked to finish last in the Big 12 last year.
Yeah.
That kind of says it all on how much this preseason, even early season stuff means. It really doesn't mean a whole lot. Shoot, USC beat LSU last year, game one, and fans were thinking, playoffs, here we come. Few weeks later, it was 6-6.
I mean, you could even argue, like, I've heard arguments that really that they shouldn't have the polls until about maybe a month into the season. So that
Yeah.
way any of the preseason biases can kind of get completely worked out of all the AP voters. And I'm not trying to say everyone inherent is like trying to be biased, but just that's just an inherent human characteristic.
Oh yeah.
And just I think that could be something, but I mean it probably won't because the networks like it to, kind of advertise these big ranked matchups that they have coming up each week. But I think it's something that there's definitely an argument for it, even though obviously I don't think they will. There's an argument for it, is all I'm trying to say. And I think definitely, like we've been saying, I think if USC stays unranked, I don't think it inherently hurts them.
Yeah, it really doesn't hurt them. You keep winning, everything takes care of itself. But at the same time, you have fans that are looking at these rankings and they're seeing these schools in the top 25 and they're thinking, there's no way that they could beat us. So what it is, it's all about clicks, conversation, discussion, whatever you want to call it, and it's all good. I think that fans get a little bit too carried away with the rankings and all that kind of stuff. Week two, it really doesn't mean a whole lot. Um, the last thing I do want to mention, go back to recruiting a little bit here, is IMG Academy can no longer play any of the California high schools per CIF. I don't know what the reasoning is, but about 6, 7 years ago, I think they made a rule to where the California schools could no longer play IMG Academy. So what IMG Academy is doing is they're playing Coronado from Nevada on Saturday at Saddleback College. So that is the game that I am going to be at, and that is a game loaded with USC prospects. So we'll have a lot to talk about next week about this game. I'll also be going to Mater Dei versus Corona Centennial on Friday night. So I'll get a chance to see the tight end, Keave Brown, who's going to be taking an official visit to USC next weekend, and all of the Mater Dei kids. And there's plenty of other Corona Centennial kids that are worth watching as well. So looking forward to that. Also, the last thing I wanted to mention is Trillion Boys, one of the premier 7-on-7 clubs in the nation. They had 35 guys at the USC football game this past weekend. And one guy that I forgot to mention is Aaron Washington from Mater Dei. So I was just looking at my list. That's a little brain fart there. There were several other guys too. We wrote a story on it, so I'm not going to go and list all 35 guys, but it's impressive to watch the guys. Grant Mosley was a part of this. His brother Trent is committed to USC from Santa Margarita High School, and Dante Wright was with them. And other than that, there's a pretty impressive list. But anyway, that is about it for this week, unless you got anything else you want to bring up.
I think we've kind of covered everything in terms of recruiting, Michigan State game outrage, previewing Purdue, recapping Georgia Southern. I think we got it all, Scott.
Anything hoops related that might be worth just signing off with?
I mean, it looks like Elijah Arenas is even trying to shoot. I saw some photos on Instagram earlier today of him even in I think one of those electric wheelchairs.
Oh, wow.
I think he's still insisting on shooting hoops. I saw it earlier today. I think ESPN, all the accounts are reposting what USC Athletics and USC and USC Hoops have been putting up on their socials about him just refusing to just lie down and just give in, which I think you really respect. And you can just show that guy is a competitor. I mean, and even just thinking about the tragic car accident that he was in a few months back, just thinking about how quickly he was out of the coma and was pretty much all but set to be back when then he had that unfortunate knee injury that's keeping him out this year.
God, if USC didn't have bad luck with the basketball program, they wouldn't have any luck. It seems like their top players over the last few years have had some struggles with health issues. So hopefully there's a quick recovery for Elijah. And he's one of those guys. We had a conversation wondering if he'll even ever play a game at USC. I'm hope that he was the first recruit. I went and saw Collier and those guys, but this is the first time I was really looking forward to a guy coming in and watching him play at USC. Have you watched any of his highlights just to kind of get a grasp on how good he really is?
I think I may have seen a couple, but I haven't intensively watched it. But I've bought into the hype of it, and I think that just speaks to kind of just how much head coach Eric Musselman is willing to just be a face for his team and really hype up his guys and just do what it takes to get people to those games. Really just kind of be more, just try to really just be there, just show that this is who we are. We want you to come watch us. I think it's just you see that he's really trying to do whatever it takes to get good recruits and try to build a solid fan base that wants to come to Galen Center every night. And I think you're seeing them trying to do all this outreach and connect with even students on campus. I think I've been seeing on the Legion USC account that they're trying to today. Mm-hmm. He's you got to go find him for bonus points for the Legion Pass app, or their whole team actually was at the soccer game last week. I actually got to meet all of them because right as I got in, Muss is there and he's like, I want you to meet the whole team. So you just see they're really trying to, make a name for themselves and want people to come. So I think it's smart how they're doing it. And I think getting Arenas is really going to help with that. And him being back, I think, still just keeps that belief alive that this season can still be special even without him.
Yeah, they were all at the football game too on Saturday. Muss was
Yeah.
leading them all around the.
Oh yeah, I saw. I actually got to say hi to him really quickly from where I was sitting for the first half.
Yeah,
I went down to the front and just yelled "Coach," and he waved at me. So it was pretty cool to see him out there.
is that guy ever home?
That's a good question.
I mean, he's always got photos up on social media. I mean, this guy is everywhere. I mean, it's impressive the energy he has.
I
I guess
mean,
that's the bottom line.
I don't know for sure, but I would not be surprised if he has an air mattress in his office at USC.
Yeah. All right. Well, hey, that was another great show, and stay tuned for next week. We'll probably have another good one next week, and look forward to seeing you in about 5 days, 6 days.
All right, fight on.
Fight on.